I got the recording. Yep, I got the recording.
Okay.
And Peter, you are set up to be whoever's sharing first and starting first. I'll hand it over to you to kick this off. Welcome to everybody.
Peter, do you want me to share the documents?
You're going to have to share the document because I can't see where I'm allowed to share it from my thumbnail.
Let's see. All right, 1 second.
I think Rachel's going to have to stop sharing her screen before you can.
I think you're right.
Okay.
Are you seeing that?
Yep.
We are now.
Great.
So everyone, this is Peter Mazanis, and I, along with Ann Shores and Skip Fidanzo, are the authors of this document, which we'll go through pretty quickly to tell you in overview what it is. The first page is an explanation of the NRG to node to CERT radio protocols and why they were established. The second page, and if you can roll to it, is a drawing showing the 7 nodes that we created, which will explain why they were created. The third page is a schematic that we developed that really explains the hierarchy in the protocol. And the last 2 pages are one is by node, by NRG, how many homes there are, what are the channel assignments, and what is the wattage. The wattage is less important, as you'll understand later on, but it's how many homes and then what are the channels that are assigned to each of the NRGs. And in the darker blocks to the left, what are the channels assigned to each of the nodes. And the last page is a more detailed, really informational page on the assignments of channels to the various NRGs. So Ann, if you can roll back to the first page. The Central Marin NRG program is basically divided into 40 neighborhood response groups. That's going to grow to as many as 75 when Kent Woodlands comes on board. But the 40 alone, we began to notice a couple of years ago, started to create problems because as new NRGs came on board, some of the cowboys and cowgirls decided they wanted to exercise their radio rights. And so they started calling things directly into CERT from the field to not even through their NRG incident command, but directly to CERT. So what we decided to do was to look back on a program that actually John and Lee Howard had talked about 4 or 5 years ago, long before I became involved in the program, which was to create nodes. So we looked at the map and said, what are the contiguous NRGs and how can we create nodes? With that, we created 7 nodes. And the hierarchy here is that each of the NRGs is divided up into clusters. Each cluster has 2 or more block captains. Each of the block captains should have a Midland GXT 1000, or in some cases, a Motorola handheld radio. Those radios are tuned to the frequency for that NRG so that the block captains are able to report incidents up to the incident command for that NRG. So that's kind of the way everyone has learned to do it so far. What we've interjected into the middle to frankly simplify radio communications and to tighten up the span of control is that we've instituted these nodes. In the Madrone node where I am, it's Madrone Canyon, Baltimore Park, Wiltshire, Blue Rock, Palm Hill, and Heather Gardens. And on one of those last pages, you can see how all that's divided up. So what happens when we do drills, the block captains report up to the NRG incidents or simulated incidents in all cases so far. And then the NRGs communicate to the node. They report incidents up to the node. At the node level, decisions are made as to which of the incidents can be handled locally by local CERTs, or which incidents need to be escalated to Central Marin CERT. And we're going to get into that, and Ann's going to do some exercises on that later. And then the critical part of it here is because so far all we've done is had a gaggle of us all talking together. At the CERT level, and Rob Ireson's on with us, as is Ann, they're both ham radio operators, where the ham radio operators have a seat at the table at the EOC, at the OES, where the EOC is the radio command center. So what we have is the ability to have CERT through ham radio operators communicate with the OES, so we can get incidents that need to be escalated up to that level. Otherwise, we have no communication except amongst ourselves. We have no way to directly communicate with fire, no way to communicate with the police department. So that's a critical aspect of what we're doing. But what it all comes down to is what gets escalated are the areas or the incidents that cannot be handled by local CERT or at the local level. Any questions that come out of that? Clear as mud. And why don't you move on now to the node drawing.
I've got a question for you. Excuse me.
Okay.
So, so we have to interface through ham operators to get to higher levels. That's my understanding of what you just said?
Yes.
Okay, and how are these ham operators dispersed throughout these nodes? And is there one for each one, or?
No, they are at Central Marin CERT. But that is a good question.
Mhm.
And let's let Ann and Rob Ireson get into that later on, because they are the experts, because they're both part of those teams.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so what you see in front of you now is a rough approximation, and there are some errors in it, as to how the nodes were created. The light blue on the Bon Air node, which is Greenbrae Hills and across by the shopping center. Kentfield is, I might say that each node in theory, when we created them, was organized around an existing NRG local CERT trailer, of which there's one in the Cove node, there's one in Chapman, there's one in Cummins, and there's one at Madrone. And at that point, this was pre-COVID or early in COVID, we assumed that we were going to get the Twin Cities to spring for a NRG trailer in Piper Park, possibly a CERT/NRG trailer in Bon Air, and some wishful thinking is that we could get one for the college node. Those have not come to pass, so that it's the pink, the light green, and the other two at the bottom are the ones that actually have active nodes today. We hope that can get corrected certainly in the near future. Questions on those assignments, anybody?
Oh, Rob has raised his hand.
Okay,
Yeah, what happened to the Piper node? I thought there was a CERT trailer there now.
there's a CERT trailer, but currently, until they work out the politics, CERT and Central Marin CERT is distinct and different from the NRG program, which may have local CERTs within the NRGs. So we, as the NRG, and I speak with both hats because I sit on boards for both of them, we in the NRG program really have no access, no direct access, other than via radio on 1515 to CERT. So
Understood.
They're still
Thank-
different programs, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks. I understand.
Okay. So those are your 7 nodes. Ann, why don't you move down to the next slide?
Okay.
And this one, you're going to have to take down to 100% of screen. Yeah, to get it on there. Yeah. Okay. So this is a hierarchy drawing that we worked on for actually quite a while. And it was interesting because there was even amongst our group, some differences of opinion, misconceptions as to how all this was. And it was a good exercise for us. So let's go through it with you. The NRGs talk to the node talks to CERT, CERT talks to the communications part of OES in San Rafael. So what you have on the left-hand side of the drawing with the little stick figures, you have the NRG block captains plus local CERTs all use the communication channel assigned to each NRG for 100% of their communications. There may be the exceptions that local CERTs have a CERT specific radio, but that's not really a function of this. That's an exception to the rule. So what we have is we have an NRG command trailer or command desk, whatever it is, that talks to the block captains, writes down all of the incidents, simulated or real, that are reported in. If they are a node, then they have a separate radio, but also each of the NRGs has to have their radios programmed to their node channel so that they as an NRG can talk to their node. So there are 2 channels here involved in it. So if you go to the center where the local nodes are, the nodes are supporting 5 to 7 NRGs. So behind the number 1, there's the node radio channel. So they're talking to the NRGs in their node. They also have a separate radio channel where they talk node to node. So there's communication, say, between Chapman and Madrone, or Cummins and Madrone, or Chapman to the Cove. And then they communicate up using the 1515, channel 15, privacy code 15 on the Midland GXT 1000 radios to CERT. So there are 3 different radio channels. And if you are a node that's also an NRG, you have a 4th radio channel. So there's a lot of juggling, and it necessitates having more than 1 radio at each node location. Madrone node has the capability of operating 4 different radios on the 4 different channels, as well as having CERT specific radios. So we communicate up to, we filter information, we make a decision, and the decision is made by really a small committee, but it's made by the people who are at the incident command, at the node, and local CERTs to determine whether local CERTs can handle an incident that's come up, whether the local medical can handle an incident that's come up, or whether that needs to be escalated up to Central Marin CERT. If it's escalated up, it's escalated up on the channel combination 1515 to Central Marin CERT. There it is also logged in, because every incident that gets reported, simulated or otherwise, gets logged and then has to be cleared before you finish whatever the drill, the actual event is. And then, as we explained, and then Ann and Rob can explain it further, from Central Marin CERT, then there is the ability to contact Marin OES and others. Right there, let me go back into the NRG to node side of this thing. I was involved in a flurry of emails this morning regarding the Chapman node where people had not been able to communicate to the node from the upper Chapman NRG. And one of the things that a lot of us, and we've had to learn it through trial and error, but one of the things we've had to learn is that if you are standing with your back to the receiving radio, you're a mile away. And so your body is blocking your radio, which is down at your chest level, your Midland GXT 1000. That's enough to block a signal getting to a stronger radio at a NRG command IC or at a node. So it's very important to, if you don't think you're communicating, is to get out, move around, get your radio up in the air, point it straight up because it's an omni multi-directional antenna, and don't have anything between any hard objects between you and the person to whom you're trying to communicate. We're using, and we've been testing 2 different types of antennas that are lifted up 16 feet on painter poles. One is an omni antenna, which is multi-directional. It's the one with the little spiders that stick out from it, and the antenna that sticks up in the air. That's great if you're trying to have a broad radio broadcast. The other is a Yagi antenna, and Yagi by name was a Japanese electrical engineer during World War II that was charged with the responsibility of designing an antenna so the unscrupulous Americans couldn't overhear their traffic. It worked quite well. Similar antennas got developed and used by the US military, but it's still the standard for a directional antenna. The ones that we're using are supposed to be limited to an arc of about 70 to 80 degrees, but we find that they're good at an arc of about 120 degrees. But what the directional antenna does is it takes all of the electrical energy that's coming from the radio out through the antenna and forces it back in one direction. So in the Madrone Canyon, we use it successfully to drill back into the canyon and talk to people who otherwise, with an omni antenna, we wouldn't be able to talk to. I think it'll be very effective, should be very effective at the Chapman node, and should be very effective in Kent Woodlands. Another point on antennas and the fallacy of the whole thing is Terry Sternberg from Baltimore Park and I did some radio training about a year ago for the Greenbrae Hills. And the first day we went over to do it, because there were back-to-back exercises. First day we went over to do it, we took our handheld radios and stood there in the Bon Air Shopping Center and tried to talk across Sir Francis Drake to the people in Greenbrae Hills. And frankly, it was a disaster because the radio interference from the cars going up and down Sir Francis Drake is enough to kill the radio signal. The second time we did it, we took the 16-foot high painter pole in tripod antennas, used these stronger 15-watt radios, and had great reception in most places. But we still had the problem of asking people to move, and they could move 5 feet and they would have great reception, where standing somewhere else they wouldn't. So there's a lot of trial and error here. There's a lot of testing that needs to go on. But that's kind of where we are on radios today. So I'm going to pass this off to Ann, who wants to talk about the CERT side of it, and then she and Rob can talk about the CERT up to OES, and we can all take questions. And then Ann has a bunch of exercises that we're going to go through and do.
Oh, thank you, Peter. So from the CERT side, as Peter mentioned, we were getting, when every NRG was calling us during our regular drills, it was too much traffic for us to handle, too many radio messages for us to handle. And this is why we need this node system. It may seem complex, it is a little bit complex, and the people we are asking to be node radio operators will have some a bit of learning to do in terms of, using one radio to talk to their block captains and a different radio to talk to CERT. And I'm sorry, they would need one radio to talk to the NRGs that their node is supporting, and a different one to talk to CERT. So for instance, I'm in the Madeira Gardens NRG, and our block captains, I'm going to throw out some channel numbers just by way of example. You don't need to try to remember these, but our block captains talk to the NRG command on channel 8 and 8, channel 8, sub-channel 8. The NRGs will talk to the node on channel 18 and 31. And the node will talk to CERT on 15 and 15, which is the channel we have used historically for communications from NRGs to CERT. And we're trying to move to designate that to be from nodes to CERT, so that CERT, at the CERT trailer, we have less radio traffic, fewer messages coming in. And that way, any one message has a better chance of getting through. We are having messages colliding. So at the CERT trailer, we do log and try to prioritize these messages. And then whoever is being incident command at the CERT trailer would evaluate what resources they have and what the response would be. And of course, sitting here, we can't know what that would be, but if we might have CERT teams we could send out to help with search and rescue. We might have a medical team we could send out to help with medical issues. We may be able to escalate the message to the Emergency Operations Center over the ham radio link, as we've mentioned. One of the things I'd like to talk about, and that we need to think about at each link in this chain, I'm speaking of this chain here, the block captain to NRG to node to CERT, does this message need to go up further? Because we really need to think of it like a pyramid and narrow it down. Not every message needs to go further up for action. Even as a block captain, not every piece of information that comes to you are you going to report to your NRG, and it's the same at every level. It has to be filtered out. At CERT, we only really want to hear about, for the main part, about life-threatening injuries, things that if not immediately responded to would mean the difference between life and death. The other things we'd want to hear about are, fires threatening homes. To some extent, we want to hear about downed power lines and other things that we need to know about for situational awareness to keep people who are going out in the field safe. So we want to know about blocked intersections, chemical spills, fires, things like that. And as we've talked about, we will, at our level as well, evaluate what we can either try to send out a response to, or give advice on how it could be handled, or try to escalate it to the EOC. Questions or comments about that?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So one of the issues we've had, I'm in Upper Chapman, is the fact that we have not been able to communicate to the nodes. And if we'll try to work that out based on the conversations I've had with Peter, but in the event that things don't work out like we would like, according to the scenario, how effective will it be to say all of a sudden we observe a fire and we need to get attention right away? How effective will the 911 be working in an emergency situation like this?
So the scenarios that we're talking about here in general are ones where there's a widespread disaster. And thank you for asking. I should have sort of painted the background picture to begin with. We're talking about a widespread disaster where perhaps there's been a major earthquake, normal phone service may be interrupted, and 911 may not be available to you. In most instances, if we do have normal phone operations, I would suggest you do call 911, but you may not be able to get through. So when you ask how effective that would be, so much will depend on the exact occurrence. It's impossible for me to answer that with any definitive way. If you can get through to them, that is actually faster, because that's the same command center that we would be trying to reach on the radio. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Okay, Rob, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, thanks. Yeah, with regard to the 911 thing, yeah, absolutely 911 is the first choice. But remember, that's an emergency line. And just for historical context, the last major flooding in San Anselmo, which was not all that major, there was, no life-threatening injuries or anything else. There were something like an hour or an hour and a half worth of calls stacked up at the county communication center, the 911 dispatch center, from people saying there's water coming down the street. And it took them lots and lots of time to clear that. So if it's not an emergency, don't call 911. Deal with it, because it's, again, the whole theory of NRGs is you're on your own together. If it really is life-threatening, go that route if you can get through, and seek alternatives otherwise.
That's a good point. Thank you, Rob. Judy, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks. If you have a life-threatening emergency that's been identified, what actually is the likelihood that CERT could get there in time to save a life? Or should we really be focusing on trying to have to develop our own very local response?
So to the extent that you can develop a local response, that would be ideal. And we've encouraged everybody, CERT and NRG are separate programs, as Peter mentioned. It would be, and some of the NRGs have formed CERT teams within themselves. And by that, I mean, they have enough people who live in their NRG who have been CERT trained, and we have developed a protocol for when they could activate and how they should operate within the NRG. So that, for instance, if there's a widespread disaster and we are all activated, and the Madrone NRG Incident Command is set up, for instance, and the CERT team within Madrone activates, we at the CERT Incident Command trailer, and I say we as though I would be there, which is not necessarily the case, but let's assume that for the moment, we would still want to know what that CERT team is doing, because they are nominally operating under CERT command. Although they are on the spot, they would be talking to the Madrone Incident Command, gathering information directly and hopefully on the spot to form a response. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, in part, it does, but I'm thinking about the efforts to organize doctors and nurses who might live locally to be part of our response. My concern is that there's a life-threatening emergency. Block captain calls our command team. Our command team calls the node. The node calls Central Marin CERT. All of that takes some time. And then what is Central Marin CERT able realistically to do to person?
Judy,
So that-
let me interject here. You have, if they were to activate, you have 12 local certs within the Greenbrae node.
Oh, that's
You know,
interesting.
they at one time activated during a drill and not since then. But I think that's within your node, something that you and Gerd and some others that I see that are on, need to address.
And that's a good point. And also I would add that if you have you could form a medical team within your NRG if you so chose. And those people being on the spot could respond.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm a incident commander, so block captain contacts me. We got a frequency. We have radios. I know how that operates. And then is it just a separate radio to go up to the next level, or just a different frequency?
Different frequency.
Yeah, I bet it's you could do it with a different frequency or a different radio. It's you could use it's just easier sometimes to have both radios. I'm sorry, two radios, one pre-tuned to the one frequency and one pre-tuned to the other.
Right.
It's hard to monitor two channels because you can only be on one frequency
Gotcha.
at one time on one of these radios.
Okay.
Rob, would you like to add?
Yeah, I just add, if you are in an NRG command post, I believe it's absolutely vital that you have at least 3 people there. A radio operator on the NRG channel for the block captains, a scribe who is recording whatever is being reported, and another operator on the node channel monitoring that, because if you're trying to switch frequencies between the NRG channel and the node, if the node is trying to get you, and the examples for that would be, you've got 2 adjacent NRGs that have a medical emergency, and they know that you have medical professionals within your NRG, and they want to see if they're available to get to the adjacent NRGs to treat a patient, then you've got to have the NRG to node channel available at all times. There are a lot of other examples that could lead to that, but that's the only viable way to keep this working. Otherwise, things are going to fall through the cracks.
What we do in the Madrone node is we actually have as many as 4 active radios assigned, one to each of the channels, one to each of the frequencies that we're required to use. So what we have are 1 radio operator for each and 1 scribe for each, because our responsibility is to make sure that everything that's reported to us gets written down. If it doesn't get written down, it never happened, so that all of those events can be cleared. It's cumbersome. It's an exercise unto itself. Just doing it once and getting it right doesn't mean you get it right the second time, because we often have 2 5-person local CERT teams in the field. So we have a lot of communication back and forth with them. And another channel that we haven't mentioned there are separate assigned medical channels, so that there are a lot of radios in play at any one point in time.
Yeah, I'd add to that, and I absolutely agree with your concept. We're talking about what happens during a 2-hour drill that we run twice a year. In an actual event, you're talking about 48, 72, 96 hours. And if the record keeping isn't there from one shift to another, then things are going to fall through the cracks. Somebody's going to say, well, whatever happened to the person over on Fifth Street? And the response is gonna be, what happened on Fifth Street? I haven't got any records of that. The scribes are absolutely critical for that kind of thing. And the handoffs between the shifts, making sure that whoever comes in the next time around is being fully briefed on the outstanding incidents, is a critical part that we have not really dealt with very thoroughly on the NRG programs.
Good.
Rob, I don't know if you wanted to speak at all to the CERT link to the EOC.
I'm happy to do that. There's not a lot to be said. In an incident of the type Anne's described, ACS RACES will almost certainly have been activated, and the people that the ham operators within Central Marin CERT, Anne, Skip, Gert, and others, are familiar with the frequencies that we use. We will be running an ongoing net, which will primarily be focused on the county EOC's support of the professional first responders, the public safety agencies, fire, police, sheriff's office, and public works, and others. We can handle some incoming traffic, but the amount of traffic we're going to be able to take, the amount of incoming information is going to be limited. And it's mostly limited by the ability of the people that we have access to deal with it. To be clear on that, in the early stages of the major incident, the county EOC is going to not have a fully staffed operating facility. That there's likely only to be somewhere between 4 and 6 or 8 people in that building or in that room. And the key positions are going to be the EOC director, the incident commander, the planning and intelligence officer, the public information officer, and the operations chief. And there may not be anybody else. I've spoken to people who have served the role as planning and intel. And the basic thing that they conveyed is, we love situational awareness information coming in, but if it's requests for support that would normally go through a 911 kind of thing, if it is not absolutely an immediate life and death situation, we are not going to be able to deal with it for probably the first 2 or 3 days because of the staffing issues that they're going to be facing. And that's, unfortunately, the way things are shake out in these kinds of incidents. The main thing that we can do at the ACS RACES position in the EOC is collect and log situational awareness information, down overpasses, power outages, that kind of stuff, and log it and make it available to the EOC staff at the point where they're actually able to accept it. Does that help, Anne?
Yes, thank you. Are there questions? If there are, let's take some questions if there are any, and then perhaps we can go on and do run through a few sample messages if people want to do that. People will have to raise their hands using the Zoom function, or I may not see them. B. Ross, sorry, I don't know your first name. Go ahead.
Bill, couple questions. So before the node concept came about, NRG command centers would talk to CERT directly if appropriate. And the main purpose of the nodes is to sort of triage or filter some of that communications so CERT's not overloaded, correct?
Correct.
If we had a disaster tomorrow, and I'm assuming the nodes are still very much a work in progress and not tried and true, by any means at this point. It's still quite early in development. Is that accurate?
Yeah, different nodes are in different levels, but that's basically correct.
So my two questions are, if we had a disaster tomorrow, would NRG commands try to contact their nodes? I guess it depends on which node, rather than going 1515 to CERT. And the second question, part of the question is, when we do our November countywide drill, do we anticipate some node activities? And if so, what do the NRGs need to understand between now and November to be able to actively practice using the nodes?
Thank you. With respect to what you do if your node is not up and running and we have a disaster tomorrow, is you can try to call CERT on 1515, and CERT is not going to turn down anybody's call because they don't have a node. They will take your call to the extent that the radio traffic allows. You know, we're just trying to alleviate there being too many messages trying to come in at once. So I think we've all perhaps experienced the competing radio messages, and maybe the weaker signal doesn't always get in. And that's what we're trying to alleviate. But to the extent we can, we will take all the calls. Between now and November 7, you know, different nodes are running their own tests and practices to try to get this up and running. And I'm sorry, I don't know which NRG you're in.
I'm in Greenberry Hills, and how do I know if, I guess, Bon Air node is up and running, or it's still kind of a work in progress?
Yeah.
Let me just chime in, and sorry, it's Gerd here. It's still work in progress, Bill. We are having discussions, but we are not up and running just yet.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Talk to Gerd. That's the answer. Anything else, Bill?
No, thank you.
Okay. Ginger, you want to unmute yourself and go ahead?
There we go. Okay, so I'm from Hidden Valley NRG, and we were formed a number of years ago, back when we modeled ourselves on some other even older NRGs, where there was a separate channel within the NRG to talk for the block captains to talk to the NRG command, and the separate channel for the block captains to talk to the NRG medical team. And now it seems like the model does not have any kind of separate set of channels for the internal NRG medical communications. Are you recommending that the internal NRG medical communications all be done through the same channel that the block captains talk to the NRG command, or what are you recommending in that regard?
Peter, I don't know if you want to take that one.
I'll take that one. I think, Ginger, the problem we're running up against, and we frankly don't know how to get around it without spending a great deal of money, is that the radio system, the GMRS radio system that we're using, has 22 channels. It has these, what I'll call fake privacy codes, but they really don't filter. So you've only got 22 channels total. So to the extent that you assign Hidden Valley a separate channel for its own medical, then you've deprived some other NRG of a channel. So I think what we're really looking at is that your medical has to be handled over the same channel as everything else that goes on within Hidden Valley. So that would be on the same channel frequency for Midland and privacy code 8. So you're going to be stuck doing that until somebody comes up with a way to come up with a better, much more expensive radio system.
Does that answer the question?
It's not a satisfactory answer, but that's the answer.
All right. Daryl, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I'm with Lower Chapman Park. our problem is we really are operating light as far as personnel on our command staff. We have just the basic, we have one person doing 3 radio jobs basically with the node and the whatever the other one is. If I'm available, I'm normally the talker between the command staff and the block captains. And then there's somebody else on the node radio and somebody else on the NRG or the CERT radio. And I'm wondering if any thought's been given to sharing personnel between NRGs, because we could be in a situation where people are out of town or injured or dead or who knows what, and we could not have enough people to operate the command center.
So to the extent that your, for instance, I know that some nodes would be co-located with one of the NRGs, and potentially that NRG would be perceived as the one staffing the node. But absolutely, it would be appropriate where it's possible for people from the other NRGs in that node to send people to assist. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, but the question is, how do you communicate to the other NRGs to accomplish that?
Gerald, let me pipe in on that one, because what we've done is, in the Madrone node, we have actually brought in people from our adjacent NRGs to operate in our node. We have a cadre of probably 10 radio operators, a whole group of scribes. So we rotate who does what so that we get various people. We have 10 trained people who can do what you describe as your job, which was, a job of 3 people. So it's training.
Yeah, it's
motivation and training.
Yeah, it's finding the people to do it first. We're a little light on volunteers.
That's always a challenge for all of us. We're all volunteers, all trying to do the best we can.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Rob, do you want to address what you mentioned to me in chat? Maybe you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, just quickly, this goes to the question about what do you do early on when your node isn't up and operating yet, or you're not sure whether it's up and operating. This is an area where familiarity with the radios and being able to program on the fly is very useful. Our standard practice within ACS RACES and almost all ham radio nets is, if something happens and you know something's going on and you're not sure what's going on, the first thing you do is start listening to the frequencies that you know are likely to be active and see who's there, see if there's traffic going on. And it would start with your NRG, and then followed by your node frequency, and followed by the CERT frequency, and followed by adjacent node frequencies if you can hear those. And if if you don't hear anything going on, call out and say, hey, this is Lower Chapman block 17, and I'm trying to find out if anybody's on the air. For ham radio stuff, and again, especially ACS RACES, the standard rule was the first person on the frequency becomes the net control operator and solicits whoever else is out there to provide situational awareness and try to get things organized. And as more people come on, the net can be reorganized and refocused on the node or the CERT facility. And specifically for Lower Chapman with limited operators. And this is sort of a different suggestion. The Neil Cummins node might well service a lot of the Chapman NRGs just because of terrain. And if you're really short on staff, it might be possible to actually move an NRG command post to that location, but that needs testing. There's a lot of options, and the ham radio mantra is, akin to the Marine Semper Fidelis. It's Semper Gumby, always flexible. Find a way around it. Learn what you can do.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? If not, and if we haven't exceeded everyone's patience and tolerance, we thought we might do a few sample messages that you can see what we're talking about in terms of taking a description of what is going on, distilling it down to its essence, and deciding, making a decision whether to pass it up or not. If people want to do that, we can do a couple of those. And if so, what I'd like to do is have some volunteers to play block captains. And if you could raise your hand in the using that function. What I'm going to do is have a block captain. I'll describe a scenario, and the block captain, then I would like them to condense it down to what radio message they would want to send to their incident command at the NRG. And Rachel, I didn't warn you about this, but I'm going to ask you to play the NRG incident command and make a decision then about whether to pass the message up to your node. Peter, I'm going to ask you to play the node and make a decision about whether to pass it to CERT.
Will do.
All right, everybody game for this? If no one volunteers to be a block captain, nobody has yet. Anybody? All right.
You get a pick.
Oh boy. All right. Garrett, I'm going to pick on you. You can be the block captain.
How comes I knew you would pick me?
All right, you just, because you felt lucky. All right, so I'm going to read out a description of something that's going on, and you will decide what to put in your radio message to your incident command. Okay? And I know many of you know this, but I'm just going to say this again. When I read out a description, this is not to be repeated word for word. This is a picture of what's going on. We want our radio messages to be as concise as possible. Okay.
And I would actually like to nominate somebody else. I'm not the right person for the incident command. So who could serve this role for incident command?
You know, this is a learning experience for everybody. But go ahead if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm gonna, because it's important for this group to have this information. Judy, would you like to be incident command?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it.
Thank you.
What I would say is that what you would pass on to CERT, or to the node in this case, would really depend, as I see it, on what your capabilities are in your NRG, so that some NRGs who have, let's say, 0 resources would pass everything to their nodes, and some sound extraordinarily well equipped, and lots of volunteers might, for the very same incident, simply call their medical team into play and not pass it to CERT. So
that's absolutely correct. And also, what gets passed up, how far, will partly depend on where we are in the incident. When it first happens, resources may be more scarce. Some resources may become more available as we go along. And, you know, things will, conversely, other resources may become more scarce. So there are not going to be very hard and fast answers. We can discuss each of these at every step, because these are all judgment calls. There's no right and wrong answers. This will all be an illustration of some possibilities, and we will all be learning from this.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
All right. Here's our first incident. An elderly man is trapped under a piano. He is conscious, but his leg is clearly broken. Gerd?
On a note for manor NRG with priority traffic.
You're going to call your incident commander at your NRG. I
That's
thought,
me, Gerd. Judy.
yeah, we're not, and then Judy will decide whether to up it to the node. Sorry, I may have misheard you. I thought I heard you say you were calling your node.
Yeah, I was calling node, so sorry. I'm calling incident. Yeah, okay. So it would be incident command for manor NRG.
Okay, and what is your message that you're passing
And
along
then,
to you?
okay, so once I'm asked, I would say trapped person with injuries at property address so and so. Can you provide help?
Okay. Judy?
Okay. I would likely go back to the block captain and ask for additional information. I would say, does this appear to be a life-threatening situation? Do you have an idea what the injuries are? And that's what I would do. So I would not escalate this at this point. I would want more information.
Okay.
Which I think makes sense under the assumption that you have some resources available. You already know that there's an injury and there's a trapped person, so somebody needs
Right.
to lift or move something. So then I would explain elderly man trapped under a piano with a broken leg.
Okay. At this point, given the Navarro NRG's resources, I would escalate this to the node because we have 0 medical personnel at this point to either provide advice or anything like that. I could see that when this goes through our NRG, there might be somebody that we could say, are there people around there to help lift the piano? Are you comfortable? First, we would ask, are you comfortable doing anything as a block captain? Because our block captains have been told their only function really is to report. They don't have to actually do anything. So if the block captain says no, we might ask them to knock on doors and see if there's someone who can move the piano, but I would escalate the injury because we have nobody.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that makes sense to me. One of the things that CERTs are trained in is light search and rescue. And so this might be a good case to see if there is a CERT team available nearby who can come and try to help with that kind of thing.
Okay, but we could not call CERT. We would call our node, right?
And the node would call CERT. Yes, exactly
Okay.
right. Yes. Okay, so
I actually
Judy,
realized I misunderstood the assignment because I was a block captain, not not the NRG already. The NRG
yes,
command
yes,
post. So
sorry, I may
I
not
got
have
ahead
been,
of myself. My apologies.
that's okay. I may not have been clear about that. All right, so Judy, you at your NRG are going to call Peter, who's your node. And but first, let's pause for just a second. Daryl, you have a question. You want to unmute? Now you've muted again. You're muted, Daryl.
Too many buttons. 2.
There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. Would it be appropriate for whoever's operating the node to then ask the NRGs that are part of the node if they have anybody that can help in this situation to come on down and do it, or do they have to go up to CERT?
Peter, you've just got this message. What are you going to do?
So I have now received the message. Okay. we have one active local CERT team from Cape Marin of 5 people. We have the ability, if you can pass up to me an address, we have the ability to have members, that full CERT team, come to your location and lift the piano off of the person's leg, and they will also have a medical bag with them. What is the severity of the injury? Is there any indication as to whether we need to transport the individual after taking care of the wound or the fracture? Judy?
The block captain did not indicate a life-threatening emergency. So, but I could contact the block captain and find out.
Why don't you reach
But you know
back?
that raises a very good question, namely transporting, which is something we have really been struggling with here in our NRG, because if you transport somebody off of our hill and down to a central location, and you have an emergency that's lasting days with no professional responders, you have to provide sanitation, you have to provide light, you have to provide heat, you have to have some kind of staffing around the clock to watch that person. We are really, in our own NRG now, in terms of our thinking, leaning not to transport anybody until we know that somebody can come and pick them up. I don't know what your thought would be about that. Since you mentioned transport, I wanted to raise it.
So go ahead, Peter.
I'm not sure. Well, I think certainly the Greenbrae Hills raise significant problems, as does Wilson Way in the Madrone Canyon. What Madrone has is a backboard that we can secure someone to, that has a foam pad on it, blankets, a soft stretcher, and all of that is mounted on a garden cart with 10-inch inflated wheels. So we have the ability to move someone.
But do you have the ability to maintain them?
Do we? Yes, we have 10 physicians.
Yeah, you do. You sure do.
But so we have the ability to move them. We hope we have people to move them. We hope we have physicians that are not on duty and not on vacation.
Right.
And what we're in the process of doing with our medical tent is, because we have the medical personnel, is having IV solutions, et cetera. But we do not have the ability to maintain someone for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, so the question, we all need to think about to some extent is, if we transport someone, where do we take them? What do we do with them? Not every NRG has the ability to have, or every CERT team has the ability to have a medical treatment tent, a triage tent, where, in an ideal world, we might set up something like this and to take care and have a medical team to take care of people like that. So you always have to consider, are they better off in their own home or, somewhere else? What is the danger where they are as opposed to where we would take them? And what can we do? So it will always depend on the situation, but these things have to be considered. All right.
I'd like to go back to the comment that was made earlier and try to resolve as many incidents locally as possible. So actually, in your response, Judy, you reminded me as the block captain, maybe I could just knock on a neighbor's door and say, hey, Jeremy, can you come with me? And hopefully the two of us can lift that piano off that gentleman and splint the leg, and we are done with it. So we wouldn't even have to escalate it.
As long as
the transporting thing, your question, where do we take him to? We've just learned we take him to Madrone Canyon because they are way ahead of us. And no, seriously, the best question probably again is if that person lives alone, the best question is asking a neighbor, hey, can you spend some time with that person? Maybe stay there or at least check in with him every hour or so.
Yes. Yes, these are good points. I mean, obviously, it's not every neighbor you want or could ask to help move a piano. You know, Garrett, I know you have CERT training and other training, but we want everyone to obviously safety first. If people are going to hurt themselves lifting the piano, that doesn't help because then we have another victim. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that, you know, depending on the scenario, and if somebody's got a piano on a broken leg, it's quite likely they are not the only person suffering from injuries like that. And transporting them, attempting to transport them to some place that isn't prepared to take them is probably less important than making sure you deal with the life-threatening parts of it.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't gone through it or are not aware of it, the FADER training, the first aid for disaster response trainings that the Marin Medical Reserve Corps conducts are basically designed to stabilize somebody to the point in a life-threatening situation that they have a chance of surviving. And in this kind of situation, that may be what you have to do. And I think Garrett's suggestion is exactly right. If you can get the piano off of them and splint the leg or bandage whatever wounds are there to stop any immediate bleeding and make sure they're on the list for transport when it becomes available, that may be the best way to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Mary, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm a little disturbed, I guess, because a broken leg can be a very, very serious life-threatening thing to happen. And it occurs to me that not everybody is aware of that. I used to do volunteer ski patrol, and we took broken legs very, very serious because if it's an upper femur, it can get the femoral artery and they can die very quickly. So if it's a lower leg extremity or lower leg, it's not quite as serious because the femoral isn't involved. But it occurred to me that the first thing you'd want to do is obviously getting the piano off is good, but you'd want to get your medical team in there right away because there's quite a protocol for fixing the leg in position and not doing further harm. And, we were trained very diligently on how to do that, but I'm not sure that we got that in CERT training whatsoever. So we're fortunate up in Upper Chapman to have a trauma surgeon handy and we have several medical people. I'd certainly want to get them involved right away to determine the severity of this before I even thought about transporting anybody because they need to be dealt with critically right away.
Okay.
So CERT doesn't do that kind of training from my recollection. I'm CERT trained, but it's been a while, but we didn't cover that sort of, kind of care. So a lot of people don't have this kind of background. That's kind of what I'm getting to. And we're all trying to help as much as we can, but we could do further harm.
In this kind of major disaster that our hypothetical involves, it's a bad one because I have zero medical training. And if I'm, doing first aid, it is truly disaster first aid. So we're all going to be doing the best we can with the resources we have and the training we have. It's not going to be ideal, but you're right to point out that a broken leg can indeed be very serious and life-threatening. Where we, as you were trained in CERT, we have to sometimes triage and distinguish between someone who's going to die within minutes because their airway hasn't been opened, and someone who has a broken leg, which is also quite serious, but not in the same category. Tim, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered what I was thinking, which is from the fader training, you want to check early on for impeded breathing or bleeding, excess bleeding that could be life-threatening. And so it occurred to me in listening to the exchange that that might be something that we would try to instill in people to give the basics of what is the incident, is there breathing problem, is there bleeding going on? Because even a mild, as Mary pointed out, even a mild fracture, if it happens to puncture the skin and or an artery, can be life-threatening. So early in the communication, it seems like that would be really important to include in the message that's going up the channel.
Quite right.
So I just want to make sure we do a time check here. About 15 more minutes. I know the practice here is really the communication between the different points. And I believe you have a couple more scenarios. I don't know if there, or you want to stay focused on this one. I just want to make sure that we're using the time here.
Well, let me take Bill's question and then we could do another scenario.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll try to be brief. My opinion is similar to Mary's in that a piano falling on a leg could become a pretty serious injury or lead to other things that are serious. And also, as stated, most of the NRGs, I consider the NRG training to be light CERT. I mean, it's very, very minimal. And I'm not sure that the average NRG has the training to be able to assess how serious that injury is. And the other question I've got is, if this is a major disaster, even with the neighborhoods that have a lot of medical personnel living there, I always assume that the likelihood that they'll all get called in to the hospital or any other place that they may have affiliations is where they're going to end up. So my question is, if this was a normal day and a piano fell on someone that broke their leg, they'd be to the hospital. Would it not be, since at least if this was in Greenbrae Hills and Marin General is about as close as any place can be, is there any reason not to take someone, if you suspect something more serious, to the hospital where they have a triage process? And if there's 20 people ahead of them more seriously, then they'll be taken first. But it seems that that still would be as safe a place unless it's absolutely clearly not leading to a serious injury.
So are you wondering whether they aren't safer off to shelter in place? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
So my question is there any reason not to be taking them, if they can be transported, to transport them to Marin General, which is less than a mile away? And if there's more urgent cases there, they have a triage process in place, as opposed to taking them to Bon Air and hoping there's a tent, or keeping them at home.
I actually think, Bill, the problem is already, how do you make that patient transport ready? That requires a lot of training, because you cannot just grab somebody with a broken leg and drag him behind you. You have to splint the leg, you have to stabilize it. And that's actually the biggest part of what that patient needs in that immediate situation.
And I'm assuming they're stabilized. Then the decision is, do you keep it at home with someone in a possibly dangerous situation, or do you try to get him somewhere else? I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on it, but I'm trying to formulate a decision-making process. And my instinct would be, if they're stable, if there is a way to get them somewhere, I would think about taking them there.
Yeah, I mean, some of our areas are a little more far flung, and if the freeway is shattered, for instance, by this major earthquake in our hypothesis, that we may not have that option. Rob, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just one other thing. Before you even consider that, you need to make sure that the Marin General is even accepting patients at that point. They could well be completely out of service.
Right.
And so, and in this kind of situation, one of our jobs is to make sure that the facility status of the hospitals in the area is known at the EOC, and that the dispatch calls for the paramedics and all of that kind of stuff understand where they can take patients. And we're not going to know that at the neighborhood level. There is absolutely no way of knowing that in any kind of reasonable period of time.
This is Peter with a question for Mark from UCSF in Greenberry Hills. Mark, what is UCSF's protocol in the event of a disaster for you guys to, to circle the wagons and come home, or what is it?
I don't have any idea. I'm a volunteer clinical professor, and I'm not really.
You're not clinical? Okay.
I am clinical, but not in a way that's relevant to your question. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Let's do one more quick scenario. So Gerd, you're the block captain again, if you're willing. A gas leak. We have a home with a gas leak, and there's a fire. So that house is fully engulfed, and the house next door is catching. What do you do? Both homes are occupied.
Both homes are, what did you say, unoccupied or occupied?
They are occupied. And so, the neighbors say, I don't know if the Jones family is at home or not, but their house is burning.
Not good. Okay. Incident command for, what is it now? Cluster 7. Okay, sorry, I'm mimicking like the radio call. So I would say gas leak, 2 houses on fire, fully engulfed, likely people in the building.
Okay, Judy, go.
Okay, I would definitely escalate that to the node. I would call the node, I would give the addresses, and I would report the fire. Likely, we would also ask the block captain to knock on neighboring doors and warn people to evacuate down to the park. We would not be advising anybody to go into a building that was on fire.
Yeah,
okay.
And I kind of decided for myself I wouldn't even try to shut off the gas because you said the building is fully engulfed. So
right,
close.
Possibly other homes on the block, but not that one for sure. All right, Peter, you've got this report of this home that's fully engulfed at the node. What are you going to do?
We would certainly escalate that to CERT immediately. The other thing we would do back down channel is we would ask if there is, if there are other block captains or other volunteers in the area that would try to do evacuation, try to move people away from the 2 houses that are burning. But I also would not recommend that anyone go in, because it doesn't seem from the description as though it's possible to safely enter.
Okay, so I'm at CERT. You've escalated this message to me. I don't have a CERT team I would ever send into a situation like that. We're not trained for that. So I would immediately try to escalate that to the Emergency Operations Center. And commend everyone for their efforts in trying to warn and evacuate the other neighbors nearby. All right.
And I'm going to interject on that one. Would somebody have already called 911?
if 911 is operating, we are
Okay.
sort of hypothesizing that it's either down or it's so jammed that you can't get through. But that would be definitely worth a 911 call if you can get through.
Okay, so that would be the first step before, from the block captain, like the block captain's calling 911, hopefully getting through. And the block captain is then also maybe simultaneously, hopefully calling to the command center.
Correct.
Rachel, one of the problems you have in Southern Marin is that our power comes over Highway 37 and it goes down and it dead ends in Sausalito. So that when there is a PSPS or anything else where they shut off the power, it gets shut off in Novato, and everything from Novato basically to Sausalito goes dark. And in the last two PSPSs, most of the cell towers went down between 4 to 6 hours, in 4 to 6 hours. So you're going to probably not have, in the best of circumstances, you're not going to have cell communication. You're probably not going to have landlines. All you're going to have is the ability for the ham radio operators to communicate up to OES.
Okay.
Now, and they say that they have tried to make, smaller, microgrids, and that they have tried to add more backup capability to the cell towers, but that has not been tested this year yet. We still may get there. Rob?
Yeah, a couple of things. CERT, I assume, would phone that, call that into the EOC. And that's the kind of message that would be immediately walked to planning and intel or to the operations chief, whoever was available at the time, since it couldn't go through the comm center on 911, and would be presumably relayed to the fire rescue position in the EOC. And depending on what else they had going on, would get on their list. And it depends on whether there's massive conflagrations elsewhere in the county in large residential areas, or whether this is something that can be handled locally, would determine how they responded. And seconding Ann's point, there has been some significant improvement in the backup power for cell towers and the isolation of grid components. But I think the operating assumption should still be, since this kind of stuff could be happening 2 days or 3 days into an incident, that cell signals are quite likely to be unreliable. The other thing also to remember as far as cell stuff goes, and this needs to be said over and over again, if the cell system is marginal, texts can get through when voice can't. And so for those areas that do have text 911 capability, they should know it and use it.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? Any questions about that incident or the other one or anything previously? Any comments? Everyone just wants to get on with their evening. I don't blame anybody.
I'd like to thank Peter and Ann and Rob for leading this discussion. I think it's very, very helpful to walk through the scenarios, but also have you walk through the illustration of the communication channels. So we'll continue to have these types of sessions. If your specific NRG would like more training, either block captain training or radio training or other types of training, we are happy to try to coordinate that with you and organize some information. If you have other issues with your NRG, reach out to me and we can talk about what's going on. There's always the conversations about recruiting new people and how to energize NRGs, and I'm your resource for that. So we'll continue to work through things. The next timely topic we have scheduled is on the 28th of September. We'll have Todd Lando coming to speak about zone haven and evacuation routes. So make sure you have that on your calendar. I'll be sending out information in advance of that. I'll also be, again, the documents that were shared this evening are available on the NRG Marin site. I'll also send them out to everybody so you have those. And again, this recording will also be included with that.
Okay,
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job, everybody. Thank you so much.
thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye-bye.
Night.
Night.